Welcome to the second video out of 3 on Windows Auditing. In this video, I will look at how to configure auditing for objects in Active Directory. By the end of this video, you will be able to determine which servers you would need to configure auditing on to get the best results. Before I look at how to configure auditing and what settings can be configured, the first thing to consider is where to configure auditing and what to audit. Consider this example. When a user logs onto the domain controller that they use to access the network can record this event in its event viewer. If the user then attempts to access a file on a file server, the file server can generate an event indicating a connection was made to the file server. If the user was to log on to the domain at another time, for example the next day, if there were multiple domain controllers on the network, a different domain controller may authenticate the user, and thus the event will be recorded on that domain controller. When using auditing on your network, in order to get the best results, you may need to look at the events from a number of different servers. I will now change to my Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controller to look at how to configure auditing. To configure the auditing settings for the domain, I will first open Group Policy Management from Administrative Tools under the Start menu. In this case, I will modify the default domain policy. It should be pointed out that auditing settings can be configured anywhere in the domain or using local group policy. The auditing settings can be found in Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, Local Policies, and then Audit Policy. There are 9 audit settings that can be configured. If I open Audit Account Logon Events, I can tick the option Define these policy settings. Once I tick this box, I will get the choice to audit success and failure. When choosing which settings to audit and which not to audit, it is worth having a look at the Explain tab. The Explain tab will give you a detailed description of what the setting does. It is important to understand what each setting audits and what it does not audit before you configure it. Be careful which settings you choose to enable. If you enable a setting that records a lot of events, this can cause performance problems on that computer and cause the event log to fill up very quickly. If I cancel out of here and go back to the group policy settings, you will notice that none of them are configured, and this would tend to suggest that no auditing is happening. If I open the event viewer from the Start menu and then open the security log, you will notice that there are a number of events generated for logons, but as we have seen, no auditing settings have been configured. So how are these events being generated? If I close out of all these windows, I will now leave Windows and have a closer look at the audit policy settings in more detail. You will notice on the far right in Windows Server 2008 R2, some of the audit settings are enabled by default. You will notice in the default settings, there are only settings configured for success. They do not have any settings that are configured for failure by default. The first setting, Audit Account Logon Events, will audit logins when the computer is considered an authoritative for that account. For example, if you attempt to log on using a domain account, the domain controllers in the domain will log an audit event in its security log. This is because the domain controller holds domain accounts and thus is considered an authority for domain accounts. In contrast, if a user were to log in to a workstation using a local account stored on that computer would be considered an authority for that user account. Thus, when you log into a workstation using a local account, an event will be logged in the security log of that local computer if auditing is configured. It should be remembered that a logon event can also happen in other ways. Besides logon locally and using remote desktop, a logon event can also be created when accessing a resource on another computer. For example, if the user attempts to access a file share, the user will first need to log on to the file server before it can access the files. If you log into a computer physically and obtain a desktop, this is referred to as an interactive login. This audit setting does not take into account if the login is interactive or not. It simply records that a logon has occurred. Once the logon has occurred, the user account is able to access other resources. The next audit setting is Audit Account Management. This audits changes to user accounts like creating, changing, and password resets. The next setting is Audit Directory Services. This will audit changes to Active Directory accounts. It should be noted that not all objects in Active Directory will be audited by default. We will see in the demonstration how to configure which objects will be audited. The next setting is Audit Logon Events. This may seem similar to Audit Account Logon Events. There are two fundamental differences. First, regardless of where the account is located, that is in Active Directory or locally, this event will be generated whenever a connection is made. For example, if you attempted to access a file server using a domain user, the file server would generate an audit logon event even though the user is located in Active Directory. In contrast, if Audit Account Logon event were enabled, no event would be recorded on the file server. The event would be logged on a domain controller. To put it another way, Audit Account Logon events record authentication, that is, when a username and password is checked to be valid. Audit Logon events record access after the user was authenticated. For example, a user accessing a file server. The second difference between the two events is that Audit Logon events records a lot more information. Audit Account Logon records authentication and that is it. Once a user is authenticated, there is no way using Audit Logon events to know how long the user was logged in or what they accessed. Audit Logon events, in contrast, records information like when the user disconnected from the server, logged off, and account lockout. This gives you more of an indication of what servers the user used and how long they were using them. The next setting is Audit Object Access. This will essentially audit non-Active Directory objects. These include files and folders. Since enabling this setting can cause performance problems, this setting is disabled by default. In the next video, I will look at how to use this setting to audit file and folder access. The next setting is Audit Policy Change. This tracks changes to policy like user rights assignment, auditing, accounts, and trust policy. For example, changing any of the audit settings here will generate an Audit Policy Change event. The next setting is Audit Privilege Use. This setting audits when privileges are used in the operating system. An example of privileges is taking ownership of files and folders and changing the system time. The next setting is Audit Process Tracking. This tracks the starting and ending of processors' use by applications. This would only be enabled in special troubleshooting scenarios due to the amount of events that it would generate. The last setting is Audit System Events. This records events like system startup, shutdowns, time changes, and changes to the log files. In some cases, it may not be enough to know that a change has occurred. You may also want to know what the value was before the change. For example, when membership for an Active Directory group is changed, you may want to know what the membership was before the change. With Windows Server 2008, Active Directory Service Access has been improved to be able to record information about what has changed. For example, if a user is removed from a group, the event will contain information about which user was removed from the group. Before Windows Server 2008, an event would be recorded telling you a change had been made, but would not tell you what the data was before the change. To enable the additional auditing in Windows Server 2008, run the following command. Once the setting has been enabled, Windows will start recording additional information, allowing the administrator to determine what the value was before the change. I will now change to my Windows Server 2008 R2 domain controller to look at how to use this option. First of all, I will open a command prompt. From the command prompt, I need to enable changes to be recorded by using the audit pol command. If this command is not run, auditing will be performed in the same way as previous operating systems, and this will not record previous values when changes are made. Now that the change has been made, I will now open Active Directory Users and Computers from the Start menu. Next, I will open Users and then open the properties for Domain Admins. From the properties, I will select the Security tab and then press the button at the bottom, Advanced. Next, I will select the Auditing tab. Notice that at the top, an entry has been added just for domain admins. This is not inherited. The SACL for domain admins is automatically configured to audit changes. If you want to audit a different group, you need to ensure that SACL is configured correctly. For the other domain groups, this will not be configured by default, and the administrator will need to configure it before auditing can occur for these groups. If I edit this entry, check that Write All Properties is ticked. This will ensure that auditing happens when the changes to the group occur. If I now exit out of here and go to the Members tab, I will now add the Domain Users group to the Domain Admins group. This is the kind of mistake that you would want to audit and correct quickly. Now that the Domain Users group has been added to the Domain Admins group, I will exit out of here and open the Event Viewer from the Start menu. To access the events that were recorded by auditing, I will open the Security log. If I open the event at the top, this event was audited when I made the change. You can see at the top, the user that made the change was the IT Free Training Administrator. Further down, you can see that the group for the attribute that was changed was Domain Users. At the bottom, you can see that the operation that was performed was that a value was added. In this case, it shows that something was added. But what happens when a value is changed? If I exit here and open Active Directory Users and Computers, this time I will make a change to the administrator account in the domain. If I open the properties for the domain administrator account, I can see the phone number for the domain administrator. In this case, I will remove the last digits of the phone but leave the first digits. This is an example of when you would want access to the previous value so you can undo a change that was made by mistake. If I exit here and go back to the Event Viewer, I will need to press F5 to refresh the view to read the new events. If I open the event at the top, notice that at the bottom the operation is listed as deleted and the value is listed above. This may seem a little strange because I modified the value rather than deleting it. If I exit here and open the next event, notice that if I scroll down, the value is listed as the new value. If you think of this in terms of databases, this makes sense. The old value was deleted from the database and a new value added. Unfortunately, all the information is not in the same event, making it difficult to find. When you are looking through the security logs, make sure you look at the events around the event that you are interested in. Doing this will give you a complete picture of what has happened. Thanks for watching another video from IT Free Training. For more free videos for this course and others, please feel free to visit our website or YouTube channel. See you in the next video.